Hey guys, this is Coach Chris, and this is another episode of Jiu Jitsu Therapy with Chris Mize. Working the board today is Coach Chris Bowen, and we really appreciate him doing that. He kind of makes the world happen. And hope everybody is faring okay through all the quarantine stuff and picking up some new skills and staying healthy and just being positive. That's what we want, and that's what everybody needs to do. Today we wanted to some things kind of entered my mind, and nowadays it seems like everybody talks about, there's so many different styles of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. There's not just sport and self-defense based. That's just nice general things, but there's so many different styles depending on who's the founder of that particular thing. Kenan Cornelius has his thing. Of course, Eddie Bravo has his thing. Andre Galvao. Everybody has little subtle differences they're kind of known for. There's more wrestling styles. There's more stuff based on competition, of course, like I said, with those guys. There's the guys out in Torrance, Huron and Henner, and they tend to do kind of a mix, but then they look more at the self-defense end of it. I think there's all those different types. Well, I started thinking about all that, and I had listened to it was an interview with Pharrell and Rick Rubens, the producer. And it was kind of a long interview, but at one point, Pharrell was talking about he had written Blurred Lines for Robin Thicke, which he ended up getting sued over and lost because Marvin Gaye's family had sued him because the song, the beat of this, or the hook sound of the song sounded like a Marvin Gaye song. And it went to a trial, and he lost, and they had expert witnesses, and it went in front of a jury, and the jury said, "Oh, it's definitely that." And so he was reflecting back on that. And again, not being a musician myself, but he says that the song itself was not like an exactly note for note version of that. So when he wrote it, he knew it clicked a lot of emotional boxes in his brain for maybe the same emotional boxes that the Marvin Gaye song did, but it wasn't the same song. And so basically what he was saying is nowadays people can say anything comes from something else. So, something is always influenced by it. It's not a note for note reproduction of that song, but in your brain, you perceive it as that. So he described it, he said he wrote, his song was Rayon and Marvin Gaye's was Silk. So basically, it's two types of fabric,
Yeah.
That's what he said. And he said, I wrote Rayon. I did not try to write Silk.
That's funny.
Yeah, and so it made me think about the similarities and the differences in jiu-jitsu and where we are with that.
Well, it's so funny that you mentioned that is for, people get hung up on old school versus new school versus this style versus that style. And, I love my Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I love my Japanese jiu-jitsu. I love my catch wrestling. And to me, we have to put a label on certain things in order to sell it or market it, if you will, because people just don't buy generic terms, or they don't like to. They feel like there's no value in it if it has a generic term. I like the generic term grappling because there's so much you can do from all your different brand names of grappling, and it's hard to say, I've heard people say they don't like the term Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And then other people saying, well, that's just not fair to put somebody's name on it because it technically comes from Japan. It gets deep, when you get to people talking about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there's little modifications. You look at, even what Eddie Bravo did. He had a lot of different influences, but he studied Machado Jiu-Jitsu. That's the root and the base of it, and so he still, I think, Jean-Jacques promotes Eddie,
Right,
still,
right.
Doing his own thing. He just has his own little brand of it. So yeah, there's little subtle differences, and it's going to continue. A lot of it has to do probably with mindset of it, but the reason I wanted to bring it up was back in the day, I think a lot of people forget. So, and I can start this off by asking Coach Chris because we both came from traditional martial arts backgrounds, which like a dojo, we trained, we had instructors. It was different, but when Ju- Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, or at then it was Gracie Jiu Jitsu, hit the scene with UFC 1 and UFC 2. I didn't see UFC 1 when it first came out. I watched UFC 2 live at a friend's house because he invited me over. I didn't know what I was getting into. But I'd trained for, almost 10 years prior to that. But when, quote unquote, Gracie Jiu Jitsu came out, it kind of changed the format of things, and everything became then about reality combat based stuff that under pressure what could happen, right? And like I said, in a real fight what's going to happen, not knowing what the rules are, with undisclosed really what the rules, what's going to happen. So when we started really doing what I would consider back then mixed martial arts, which was more mixed martial arts than jiu-jitsu, I guess, it was all about the fighting. Everybody that has done this for 20 years now, this piece of it started out, it wasn't just jiu-jitsu. There was no sport jiu-jitsu then. Mm-hmm. It was all about fighting. Or I say there wasn't sport jiu-jitsu here in the United States for what it is now. There was in Brazil. There was tournament stuff there, but it was all about fighting, not necessarily ultimate fighting, but fighting in a cage, fighting mm-hmm. in a ring, mm-hmm. And stuff like that. So everything was based in, can I be punched in the face? Because people would punch you in the face when you were training, so it was a different animal.
Yeah.
And then people started looking at it even in the U.S. and said, well, we'd kind of like to do it, but I really don't like getting punched in the face. So what can we do to do that? And so then, then the rules started changing and things started evolving. And, when the rules of the tournament weren't, you could get punched in the face. I mean, there used to be tournaments, guys. You would go to a tournament, not know who you were going to fight, and you would go in and whether you had pancrase rules, which was open palm slapping, you didn't wear gloves. You would just go open palm slapping. You could kick each other. You could do things. Maybe you could knee to the head or something. There was weird rules. We used to travel as far as Texas to compete in these tournaments just to see what, But then jiu-jitsu evolved to a point to where it just, the tournaments were, hey, let's make it more civilized and let's focus more on the jiu-jitsu part of it.
Right.
So.
Do you think because of that, I mean, surely you have to. It's like, if it wasn't for that, do you think jiu-jitsu would be as big as it is now in this country?
No. I think, which when Horian Gracie and whoever was working with him at the time, when they created the UFC, it was designed to showcase Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And that did a lot for, the art itself. And there'd been Vale Tudo matches in Brazil for decades and whatever, and that's the way things were. So they knew how it worked. And so it was a very loaded argument in their thought process. The rules were designed. Back then there weren't, if I remember correctly, no time limits. Mm-hmm. It was just like, and there were no gloves either. It was like, and that was to work the advantage, mm-hmm. So the guys can only hit you in the head with their bare knuckles so many times. So even you look at the World Vale Tudo Championships and stuff with Vanderlei Silva and Shogun and Ninja Hua and all those guys. And when they fought in Brazil, a lot of times it was bare knuckle mm-hmm. starting off, because that's why jiu-jitsu got to be so, it became such a prevalent thing, because you can only hit somebody in the head so much with your closed fist to do that damage, and you need to be able to finish them otherwise. So when we started adding gloves and padded gloves, it kind of changed the thing, and that's how, we have a lot more knockouts now, and we have a lot more this and that and the other. So everything kind of changed. But I was just thinking about, like I said, just jiu-jitsu. When we started really training, even though we'd both trained jiu-jitsu prior to UFC 1, mm-hmm. it wasn't the same jiu-jitsu after that.
Right.
because then it's like, well, you get a wrestler, a hold of it. You know, it became style on style for
Sure.
that for a while.
Sure.
And that's when all the Gracie and action matches and everything happened, and you know, all that the old school black and white stuff that you see now, which a lot of it's on YouTube.
Yeah.
But
God, wouldn't you love to see some of those with better cameras? Some of them are real damn grainy. I ain't gonna lie to you.
oh my gosh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's amazing that they even exist. I mean, you know, and yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, the way that just things kind of evolved, but but my point in bringing it up today was that's why we think of it a little bit differently than a lot of the guys that are in it now.
Yeah, I mean, you get somebody that's just kind of, even the younger guys or people that are just kind of getting into it, they don't understand the argument or the discussion between old school versus new school jiu-jitsu. A lot of people like to say, you know, they just think jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu, and it's all about, you know, point system, or it's all about, you know, this or that. You know, some things are very effective on the mat, and some things are not. The same things may not be so effective in a real life combat situation. It's still great in the right setting. It's just you got to put everything in context.
Just because you can do something, I always expect, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. I mean, you know, just because you can pull guard.
Yeah. Flying arm bars in the middle of the club, probably not. Look great on a John Wick movie.
That's right. That's right. But I mean, you know, like I said, pulling guard and stuff like that in a self-defense situation, unless you just end up there because you got clocked and somebody's on top of you, not the way you want to go.
Right.
Because, like I said, as Greg Nelson puts it, that tar is awful rough on you, on your back. You know, all of a sudden you look like you've been drugged behind a tractor. You know, if you end up having scuffling in the, you know, out in the parking lot. You know, that's not even really fun to train in, guys. Yeah. I know it sounds romantic, but it's really not. It's really not. It's not fun to do that.
You even made a comment one time, I think, that somebody evaluated their single leg or double leg because they did it in a parking lot and end up messing their knee up a little bit, and so the discussion was had, well, let's change it up a little bit and not go all the way down and do this or do that. So, you know, sometimes those hard lessons are best learned.
Right. Well, you know, you and I, we've talked about this. I mean, the way that if you're on bottom side and somebody's in side control top on you and you go to your knees, you know, we changed the way that we do that related to things that happened in the combat forum. Like I said, when John Jocks came up to his knees against Frank Trigg in Japan, and Frank Trigg opened him up, you know, opened his head up like a watermelon, you know, with a knee. It changed the way that jiu-jitsu was done, like coming up to the knees from that point. After that, you guys, you can look that up if you want to. But so the head position and the arm position changed. You know, it came from being, you know, it changed to more of a perpendicular kind of thought process, which is what we do with our arm bars and stuff like that now. But it just changed the way that things happen, you know, or the way that we do stuff, because out of necessity. And that's one thing about when we do stuff on the mat at all. When we roll, you can see what works under pressure. If it works against somebody, then you see if it works on the next guy, and does it work on the next person? Does it work on the next person? Then you start graduating it up. You know, it's hard to really start cultivating techniques out of the gate on a brown or a black belt. You know, you need to use kind of the lower belts to kind of start developing your game, and then seeing if your techniques, and then you just kind of take it up the hierarchy of everything and see if you can pull it off.
I won't name drop, but somebody made the comment of clout, says if you want to be a great black belt, then it's best to work everything out on your whites and blues.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you know, and I'll say this because I know from, well, secondhand, firsthand experience, but I've seen it because I've seen enough. One of the guys that we've got, he teaches teenagers. It's Coach Scott Hall. Scott's not a big guy. He's wiry, and you know, he's not a young guy either. But he teaches our teenage class. Scott does a lot of rolling, you know, and Scott's he's like a snake rolling with him. Not like an anaconda because he's not very big, but he goes through moving slow to then all of a sudden it's like then he's not.
Mm-hmm.
But he's developed that game from rolling with kids, teenagers,
Yeah.
rolling with them because he can't. One, he doesn't have a whole lot of body mass to crush people with.
Right.
So when he works with these, guys that are his size or smaller, he does good technique with them. He doesn't he doesn't try to muscle anything.
Right.
Then that transfers for him when he rolls with gorillas. I mean, he feels very fluid and his movements are like this, and all of a sudden it's like, then he puts the choke on you, and then you go to sleep. So I mean, there's that. You just develop those skills, and like I said, you just develop things as you go. You just can't just go out and say, oh, that just doesn't work because you tried it on one person.
Mm-hmm.
You need to develop like I said, through hardship and training. That's how you develop skill. You have to have stimuli to make it happen. And if you're just rolling all over everybody, that's not very stimulating.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if this relates into the conversation we're having, but how do you feel? I really know how you feel. I want other people to know how you feel. Is implementing wrestling and catch wrestling into your jiu-jitsu. I know some people may snarl at that a little bit, and I think other people may go, heck yeah. But I believe that at least wrestling in its own right has slowly creeped its way into many jiu-jitsu schools now, if you want to consider the new part, because there are so many wrestlers, high school wrestlers, college wrestlers, that have continued their grappling journey into the jiu-jitsu world, and just as a byproduct, they're bringing those wrestling techniques into their jiu-jitsu as well and teaching it, because they know those certain takedowns or their certain turnovers or something like that really works well. And I think as far as new school goes, jiu-jitsu goes, I think in another 10 years maybe, I think if you were able to look back over the timeline of 2030 versus 1995, it's like there's going to be so much wrestling and so much hybrid in the new school of jiu-jitsu that a lot of people that let's say just started today, to 2020, they started today, and they get their black belt by 2030, which probably 2025, the way I've been seeing it go here lately, and I won't get off on that. It just drives me insane.
Not today.
But by saying if you go by the rules, it takes 10 years. By 2030, their vision of jiu-jitsu is something totally different than 1995. And I bet you, if you were to talk to Master Helio today, if you could bring him back, if he was able to have a conversation today, I bet, and he could see everything that's going on, he would say the same thing. There's no way that jiu-jitsu today looked anything like it did in 1975.
I agree. I think, everything, jiu-jitsu has to be about evolution, and that's what the family did to it. They adapted it. They through different things, they made their own little adaptations on it. I think even back in the early days with the Brazilian top team with Mario Sperry and Bustamante and those guys, they had a wrestling coach, an American wrestling coach. Daryl Goler was their wrestling coach. He was a little bit, and he actually had several fights himself. He was a little bitty guy, but they understood the importance of that. One, because American wrestlers could usually always get the takedown, and and that puts them in an advantageous spot. You may hit the ground hard, so they need to not just do anti-wrestling, but also try to develop their takedown skill too. Against you want to have the right tool for the right job, But I think that there's always been a respect for wrestling, even back in the days with Holes Gracie. You look at some of the stuff.
He liked the wrestling.
Right. And you look at that, and had he not, died in an untimely fashion, then you wonder how that would have changed even the, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so he did a lot of wrestling. I mean, and it whatever way he did it, and however he learned it, but he rolled with wrestlers, and he developed part of that game, which filled a little bit of a hole in it. So yeah, I agree. I think I think everything is always about evolving. We do a decent amount of wrestling, at our school with our stuff, but it's all based around with our jiu-jitsu and how it all works together, and that's what we want to be able to make it look. And we look at it from a self-defense wrestling perspective though too. We don't just do we'll discuss it and we'll say this is more when you think of wrestling like in high school or college, this is what you see, boom. But if we're doing it out there in the parking lot, this is the way it should look. We try to be honest with everybody, and we don't want people to build bad habits. Just so happens that the things that I would do pure self-defense would also work in a MMA fight too. So some of the advantages are there, and if you're a super wrestler, you may not have to change your shot at all inside of a cage, with a soft, squishy mat.
Sure.
But if you're somebody who has marginal, wrestling skills, you need to probably do it another way, So, but yeah, I'm like you said, I think everything is always about evolving. If you're not evolving, something's going to evolve.
Either you're going to be doing it or you're not going to be doing it. Or people won't be doing it with you.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're the hammer, sometimes you're the nail. So you've got to evolve. Even with the submissions, like I said, the submissions, what everybody, jiu-jitsu and catch, they end up occupying a similar space on it. How they might go about getting there might be two different ways. I think that's probably the easiest way to describe it sometimes. But, it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. But like I said, I wanted to talk about it because I think people forget how things kind of came to where they were, in the jiu-jitsu. And I remember back, we've never really talked about it, but I knew where we came from. We came from very similar type backgrounds. And then we got kind of crossed paths early on in the mid 90s, when we were doing a lot of fighting and things like that. And back in the day, dojo storming really wasn't a thing. It was just what people did. They would come in there and they would act like they wanted to train, and they just really wanted to fight you and see if they had anything.
Right. And all up into the early 2000s. I remember it's funny to look back at. It's almost unheard of now that I know of. If you were to say people, what?
Unless you're living under a rock, unless you're just trying to disprove what's already been proven,
right.
Which is okay.
Right.
Because there's some tough dudes. There's some tough dudes that have come in and had good games too.
Yeah.
But it's hard to win a game of attrition against a good jiu-jitsu guy.
Yeah. I think now you can probably get a little bit more, not so much proving one style against the other, but usually one jiu-jitsu style against another. You'll get a guy that trains at this particular place, and they're more of a certain game, and they'll come in and, hey, they just want to prove that there's a little bit better. So it's probably the mildest that you get. Right. But yeah, I remember, man, we could talk about some funny full-on dojo storming.
Well, that was before the internet.
Yeah.
The internet changed everything. People started learning stuff, and now, to me, and I'm just going to say it, I think Coach and I, we've talked about it. If I say jiu-jitsu, if somebody doesn't know what jiu-jitsu is, they have been under a rock. Even if you don't know any jiu-jitsu, hey, that's cool.
Yeah.
I get that. But if you don't know what jiu-jitsu is, what have you been doing?
Yeah, it's everywhere.
It's in John Wick.
It's everywhere.
You say that. You say, have you seen John Wick? No, I don't know what John Wick is. Well, okay.
That makes sense.
No, but you know what I mean. Everybody has heard of jiu-jitsu.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't have to be Gracie jiu-jitsu. It doesn't have to be Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It doesn't have to, but people understand. And it's strange now, jiu-jitsu is now jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
It's not, people don't say BJJ anymore.
They
don't say Brazilian jiu-jitsu. They don't say Gracie jiu-jitsu a lot of times. It's just jiu-jitsu.
Right. It's kind of that weird full circle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And even a lot of the the Japanese styles have picked up a lot of, everything is kind of migrated to the same thing.
Yeah.
Everybody, the Sambo guys are kind of they do a lot more throws, of course, and stuff, but everything has kind of moved into a direction where everybody's utilizing guard now.
Power of information.
It is. Everybody said, "Hey, that crap works. Let's do some of that."
Yeah, let's
Because
add that.
if I end up in a bad spot, let's do that. So that's the thing. We all, again, it's evolution. You've already said it. We're evolving into something that's. And Matt Thornton said one time, unless an alien comes down with 8 arms and 8 legs, you know, things are not going to change that much.
That much.
That much. But if an alien does come down, like we have to evolve into
Sure.
what we're doing. But like I said, it's just it's interesting how things change, and through these times as we're sitting around the house and looking at old stuff and going through your drawers and finding stuff from the past, and it just made me think, man, it was at one time it was just all about fighting, and us guys who came into that, it was just because not that we maybe liked to fight, but we were just fascinated with the whole aspect of jiu-jitsu as a fighting art.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the thing to do then, for us anyway. It wasn't for everybody.
Yeah, I like to fight.
Mine,
I mean, that was my thing is
everybody's got issues, Chris.
well, that's what I was gonna say is back then I used to like to fight a lot because it was just a weird thing. That's a whole show in its own. But I'm glad it was there to for everybody, and that's what we're talking about now, and the therapy aspect of it. There's a lot when you maybe suggest that jiu-jitsu to other people, it's not always about fighting, but it's an outlet. It's an outlet to learn how you learn who you are as a person. You learn how to deal with things. You learn how to get fit. You learn how to just handle stresses. And so if you even have a young guy or young girl that you might think, well, they have an attitude problem or they have anger issues, I don't want them to learn how to fight. Well, it's not just about learning how to fight. It's, there might be, maybe a 1% that shouldn't learn how to fight because they might have some true mental issues. But for the most part, I think a lot of people need a way to express themselves, to get out that energy. It's like having a puppy, or a young dog that's just bound up. Sometimes you got to roughhouse with them, to calm them down. And I think we medicate more than we educate. And if you get out there and let these people have this jiu-jitsu therapy, I think it'll make a world of difference, people.
Well, in closing, I will tell something that Master Sauer has said. I've heard him say it on several occasions. He describes himself when he was a young man. I want him to say, he'll say a boy is what he'll say. And he'll say, I was, as they would say now, I was hyperactive. He said, I was ADHD. I was all of it, is what he said. And he said, God bless my mother. He said, but he said, if I had not found jiu-jitsu, because he liked to fight, and look at that man now.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's calm, cool.
Man, he is as cool, Yeah, it's scary when you see him pissed. I'll just tell you. And and like I said, it's I've never seen it in person. I've just seen it on film.
Yeah.
And I've seen, and you can see it. It's there.
It's in the eyes.
It's like that lion.
Yeah.
It's just chilled out and everything here, But or I should say tiger now, since everybody's saying
the tiger.
That's right. Just pet the tiger, But it might just decide to take your hand off too, But it helped him. It gave him that outlet that he needed. He got to express that negative. And it helped him grow as a man, and you learn to respect others, and you get to learn how to navigate. I was just talking to one of my friends about her grandson the other day, and we were talking about learning how to navigate a social group, as a kid, and jiu-jitsu is a great environment to do that. You learn how to, one, you learn the reality of pressure and not always coming out on top in situations, and just learning how to and how to communicate. I mean, you learn how to communicate and work with each other, and that's what we do. And I said I think it's a really good opportunity for kids, and to also see how your senior people, being around older guys and seeing how they interact with each other in a respectful way and can kid around with each other, and that way I use the word triggered. That way you don't let your anger get triggered. As a young man, that anger gets triggered sometimes.
Oh yeah.
And so you need to see, hey, there's ways that you can just deal with things, even just talk about stuff. You don't have to arm bar them or choke them out. But, you learn how guys know how to do that. And you need to have a safe environment where you can do that.
Right.
So, but anyway, well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Coach Chris, again, thank you. And guys, as we work through this quarantine thing and move through stuff, try to stay positive, try to develop new skills, try to help your neighbor, and we're going to get through this. Until next time, bye.